The ceiling groaned like a dying beast as concrete chunks crashed around Ted Medina's bleeding head. His expensive suit was torn, his empire worthless in this collapsing tunnel. Then, strong hands grabbed him, pulling him toward a maintenance shaft. "Move now or die here," the subway conductor commanded, her voice cutting through his panic. Ted had never needed anyone in his life, until this moment when Paulina Berger became his only salvation. Ted stumbled after her, his Italian leather shoes slipping on debris-covered concrete. Blood dripped steadily from the gash above his left temple, staining his custom-tailored charcoal suit that had cost more than most people earned in months. A gas explosion from the construction site above had caused the tunnel collapse during his inspection of the new subway automation system installation. His latest venture, worth $50 million, now seemed meaningless, as death lurked in every falling chunk of concrete. "Who are you?" he gasped, his voice barely audible over the thunderous settling of twisted metal and shattered stone. His hands shook as adrenaline coursed through his system, his carefully controlled world crumbling as literally as the tunnel around them. "Paulina Berger, subway conductor, and right now I'm keeping you alive," she replied, her voice steady and commanding as she pulled him through a maintenance shaft he never knew existed. Her grip on his arm was firm, confident, guiding him with the authority of someone who knew these tunnels like the back of her hand. Even through his shock and pain, Ted couldn't help but notice her competence. This wasn't some helpless victim waiting for rescue. This was someone taking complete control of a life-or-death situation. Her dark eyes were focused, calculating their next move as she assessed his injuries with professional efficiency. "Can you walk?" she asked, examining the blood streaming down his face while simultaneously listening to her radio for emergency updates. Her hands moved over his head wound with surprising gentleness, checking for signs of concussion even as she kept them moving towards safety. "I need to call my assistant," Ted managed, reaching for his phone with trembling fingers. "Get me proper help. My company has contracts with the best medical. Your phone has no signal down here, and your company can't reach you through tons of collapsed concrete." Paulina cut him off, her tone brooking no argument. "Right now, I'm the only help you've got, so listen to me if you want to live." The authoritative edge in her voice silenced his protests. Theodore Medina, worth $800 million, CEO of Medina Transportation Systems, the man who commanded boardrooms and bent city councils to his will, found himself completely dependent on a subway conductor whose name he'd learned 30 seconds ago. She guided him to passages so narrow his shoulders brushed the walls, her knowledge of every pipe, every emergency exit, every safety protocol keeping them ahead of the continuing collapse. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as dust filled the air, making each breath a conscious effort. "This way," Paulina directed, pulling him left into what looked like a dead end. But she pressed against a section of wall that swung inward, revealing another maintenance corridor. Emergency access tunnel. Most people don't know these exist, but they connect to the main evacuation routes. Ted followed her, mesmerized by her confidence. Every decision she made was swift and sure. When debris blocked their path, she found alternate routes. When his legs threatened to give out from shock and blood loss, she steadied him without breaking stride. This woman, this stranger he probably would have looked past without a second thought yesterday, was orchestrating their survival with masterful precision. "How do you know all this?" he asked as they paused at an intersection of maintenance tunnels, her radio crackling with emergency coordination updates. 23 years working these tunnels," she replied, adjusting the radio frequency. "Started as a track maintenance apprentice when I was 19. You learn every inch when your life depends on knowing the way out." The ceiling above them groaned ominously, and Paulina immediately pressed Ted against the tunnel wall, shielding his body with hers as a shower of concrete dust rained down. Her protective instinct surprised him, and the feel of her body protecting his sent an unexpected jolt through his system that had nothing to do with fear. "Easy," she murmured, her breath warm against his ear as they waited for the settling to stop. "We're almost to the safe zone." Ted found himself acutely aware of her, the strength in her arms as she held him steady, the calm determination in her voice, the way she smelled like vanilla and something uniquely her beneath the tunnel dust. This wasn't how he'd imagined his Tuesday morning going. He'd planned to inspect the automation system installation, sign off on the safety protocols, and be back in his office by lunch for a meeting with Japanese investors. "You built the automation systems," Paulina said, not really a question. She'd obviously recognized him now that shock was wearing off. "My company designed them," Ted confirmed. "We're installing them in 12 major cities. And you came down here to see them in action?" "To make sure the installation met specifications." He winced as she resumed their careful progress through the tunnels. "Though I'm starting to think I should have sent someone else." "Lucky for you that you didn't," Paulina replied. "Most people would have panicked and run the wrong direction, would have been crushed in the main tunnel." They reached a wider corridor where the ceiling looked more stable. Paulina finally allowed them to slow their pace, though she kept glancing upward, monitoring for any signs of further collapse. Ted watched her in the emergency lighting, noting how her work uniform, navy blue with transit authority patches, couldn't hide her natural curves. How her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that was now coming loose from their harrowing escape. There, she pointed ahead to a reinforced door marked Emergency Shelter. "That leads to a maintenance alcove with independent air supply and communication equipment. We can wait there safely until rescue teams can reach us." As they approached the shelter, Ted felt something he'd never experienced before: complete gratitude to another human being for his life. Not for his wealth, not for his connections, not for what he could do for them. Simply for his life. "Paulina," he said, catching her arm as she reached for the door handle. "Thank you. I would have died back there without you." She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since dragging him from the collapse. Her eyes were deep brown, intelligent, and kind despite the toughness required by her job. "That's not going to happen on my watch," she said simply. But as their eyes met in the flickering emergency lighting, something shifted between them. He was no longer just a suit she was rescuing. And she was no longer just a conductor who happened to be in the right place at the right time. There was something else building in the space between them. Something that had nothing to do with the crisis, and everything to do with the growing awareness that she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. The emergency shelter door opened into a small but well-equipped alcove. Paulina immediately began setting up their temporary refuge, her movements efficient and practiced. She activated the independent air circulation system, checked the communication equipment, and pulled first aid supplies from a wall-mounted kit. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to a bench built into the wall. "Let me look at that head wound properly." Ted obeyed, something he rarely did for anyone. As she cleaned the blood from his face with gentle efficiency, he found himself studying her features. She was beautiful, though not in the polished way of the women in his usual social circle. There was something real about her, something authentic that his world of carefully managed appearances lacked. "This needs stitches," she said, examining the gash on his temple. "But I can butterfly it closed for now. You're lucky. Head wounds bleed like crazy, but this one isn't as deep as it looked." Her touch was gentle as she worked, and Ted felt himself relaxing for the first time since the collapse began. There was something profoundly comforting about being cared for by someone who asked nothing of him, who didn't know or care about his bank account or business connections. "How long will rescue take?" he asked. "Hard to say. Could be a few hours, could be longer. Depends on how much of the tunnel system is compromised." She finished bandaging his head and settled onto the bench beside him. "At least we have supplies, air, and communication with the surface." The radio crackled with updates from emergency teams. The collapse was more extensive than initially thought, affecting 3 city blocks above ground. Multiple buildings had been evacuated. "The rescue would take time, so we wait," Ted said. "We wait," Paulina confirmed. As silence settled between them in the small underground refuge, Ted found himself studying her profile in the emergency lighting. This woman had risked her life to save his, commanded the crisis with expertise he'd never witnessed, and now sat beside him as if saving billionaire CEOs was just another Tuesday. But when she turned to meet his gaze, something electric passed between them, something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the undeniable awareness that they were alone, underground, with hours stretching ahead, and nowhere to hide from whatever was building in the charged air between them. "Ted," she said softly, and the way his name sounded on her lips made his breath catch. That's when the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Ted's breath caught. The emergency lighting had failed, plunging them into absolute blackness. His heart hammered against his ribs as claustrophobia threatened to overwhelm him. "Easy." Paulina's voice came through the darkness, calm and reassuring. The backup power kicked the lighting to the main emergency grid. "I have a flashlight." A beam of light cut through the blackness, and Ted exhaled in relief. But the small space felt even more intimate now, the circle of light creating a private world that contained only the two of them. "Better?" she asked, noting how his breathing had returned to normal. "Much." Ted realized his hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from delayed shock and something else entirely. "I don't usually. Confined spaces aren't my favorite." Understandable, given what we just went through. Paulina adjusted the flashlight so it wouldn't shine directly in their eyes, creating a soft glow between them. "Tell me something. What made you decide to inspect the tunnels yourself today?" Ted considered the question. "My father always said you can't lead what you don't understand. He started Medina Transportation from nothing. Used to tell me that every system we design affects real people's lives." Smart man. Most executives never set foot in the actual infrastructure they're profiting from. There was no judgment in her tone, just observation, but Ted felt the truth of it. "You're right. I could have sent my chief engineer, my safety manager, anyone, but something made me want to see it myself." "Maybe it was meant to happen this way," Paulina said softly. Their eyes met in the flashlight's glow, and Ted felt that electric awareness again. She was sitting close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could smell her vanilla scent, despite the tunnel dust clinging to both of them. "How long have you worked down here?" he asked, genuinely curious about this woman who commanded respect in a world he'd never truly understood. 23 years. Started right out of high school." She leaned back against the wall, her shoulder brushing his. "Always dreamed of being an engineer, but life had other plans." "What happened?" Paulina was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Foster care doesn't exactly prepare you for college applications and student loans. I needed work immediately, and the transit authority was hiring. Figured I'd work for a year, save money, then go back to school. But you never left." "The work grew on me, and," she hesitated, then continued, "it's hard to explain to people who've never struggled financially. The steady paycheck, the benefits, the job security, it becomes precious when you've never had stability." Ted felt something twist in his chest. While he'd been attending private schools and Ivy League universities, she'd been surviving, building a life from nothing. Yet here she was, the most competent person in a crisis he'd ever encountered. "You could still go back to school," he said. "Study engineering." "At 42? She laughed, but not mockingly. "I've made my peace with who I am." "Who you are is extraordinary," Ted said, the words coming out before he could stop them. She turned to look at him fully, surprise flickering across her features. "You don't know me. I know you saved my life. I know you command these tunnels like a ship captain navigates the ocean. I know you think on your feet better than most people I pay 6 figures to think sitting down." The radio crackled with an update. Rescue teams were still working to stabilize the main collapse area. It would be at least 4 more hours before they could safely extract survivors from the emergency shelters. 4 more hours, Paulina murmured. "Is that a problem?" Ted asked. "No, it's just..." She met his eyes again. "I've never spent this much time talking to someone like you." "Someone like me?" "Rich, powerful, someone who lives in a completely different world." Ted shifted closer to her on the bench, their knees almost touching. "What world do you think I live in? Penthouses, private jets, people who tell you what you want to hear because of your bank account." She studied his face in the flashlight glow. "Am I wrong?" He wanted to deny it, but honesty seemed important in this strange underground refuge. "No, you're not wrong, but that's not all of it." "What's the rest?" Ted found himself opening up in ways he never had before. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the near-death experience, or maybe it was something about Paulina's direct gaze that made pretense impossible. "Loneliness," he admitted. "My father died 3 years ago. He was the only person who ever told me the truth, who saw past the money to who I actually was. Since then, I've built the business bigger than he ever imagined, but it feels hollow. Paulina's expression softened. I'm sorry about your father. He would have liked you, Ted said. He always respected people who worked with their hands, who understood systems from the ground up. Tell me about him. For the next hour, Ted found himself sharing stories about his father, how Manuel Medina had started as a subway maintenance worker, how he'd noticed inefficiencies in the system and gradually worked his way up until he could start his own transportation consulting company. How success hadn't changed his fundamental belief that work should serve people, not the other way around. He sounds like he was a good man, Paulina said when Ted finished describing his father's last project, a safety system that had prevented a major accident in Boston. He was. I just wish I was more like him. Maybe you are, and you just don't see it yet. The way she said it, with quiet conviction, made Ted's chest tighten. When was the last time someone had seen potential in him that wasn't connected to his wealth or connections? As they talked, he became increasingly aware of small things about her. How she gestured with her hands when explaining technical concepts. How her laugh was rich and genuine. How she listened with complete attention when he spoke. There was an authenticity to her that his world completely lacked. Can I ask you something? Paulina said during a lull in conversation. Anything. What happens when we get out of here? Do you go back to your penthouse and pretend this never happened? The question caught him off guard, partially because it was so direct, and partially because he realized he didn't want to pretend any of this had never happened. Is that what you think I'll do? I think you'll try to send me some expensive thank you gift and go back to your world where people like me don't exist, except to serve people like you. Her words stung because there was truth in them. That probably would have been his reaction a week ago, but something fundamental had shifted during their hours together. You're wrong, he said quietly. Am I? Instead of answering with words, Ted reached out and gently touched her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. She didn't pull away, and the contact sent electricity through both of them. I've never met anyone like you, Paulina. I don't want to go back to pretending that competence and character don't matter more than bank accounts. Her breathing hitched slightly at his touch, and Ted realized the attraction he'd been feeling wasn't one-sided. The awareness between them had been building with every shared story, every moment of connection. Ted, she whispered, and his name on her lips was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He leaned closer, drawn by something stronger than logic or social conventions. This woman had saved his life, opened his eyes to what real strength looked like, and made him feel more alive in a few hours than he had in years. Their faces were inches apart now, her breathing as unsteady as his. The flashlight cast shadows around them, creating an intimate cocoon in their underground refuge. Thank you, he murmured, for saving my life. Ted, But before she could finish her sentence, he kissed her. Gently at first, a soft press of lips that conveyed gratitude and something deeper. When she didn't pull away, when her hand came up to rest against his chest, a kiss deepened into something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the connection that had been building between them. She tasted like possibility and strength, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. This is crazy, she whispered against his lips. Completely, he agreed, but neither of them moved away. We barely know each other. I know enough, Ted said, his forehead resting against hers. I know you're the bravest person I've ever met. I know you saved my life not because of who I am, but because it was the right thing to do. I know that in the last few hours, you've made me feel more like myself than I have in years. Paulina's eyes searched his face. And what happens tomorrow, when reality sets in? I don't know, Ted admitted, but I know I don't want this to end here. She was quiet for a long moment, then smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since the rescue began. Maybe it doesn't have to, she said softly. Just as Ted leaned in to kiss her again, her radio exploded with urgent chatter. Emergency teams had discovered another collapse zone, and toxic gas was leaking into several maintenance areas. Paulina grabbed the radio, her expression immediately shifting back to crisis mode. This is Conductor Berger in Emergency Shelter 7. Copy your traffic. Conductor Berger, you need to evacuate immediately. Gas leak detected in your sector. Emergency extraction team is en route, but you may need to move to higher ground. Ted watched Paulina's face transform as she processed the information, her romantic vulnerability replaced by professional command. The woman who had just been kissing him was once again the expert navigator who held their lives in her hands. "How long until extraction?" she asked into the radio. 20 minutes, maybe less. Can you reach emergency access point Delta 4? Paulina looked at Ted, then at their small shelter that had felt so safe moments before. "That's a quarter-mile through potentially compromised tunnels. It's your call, Conductor, but recommend immediate evacuation." As gas detection alarms began sounding in the distance, Paulina made the decision that would determine whether they lived or died. "We move now," she said, grabbing his hand. "And Ted, that conversation we were having? We're definitely finishing it when we get out of here." But as they prepared to leave their refuge and venture back into the dangerous tunnels, neither of them knew that the gas leak was just the beginning of a night that would test not only their survival skills, but everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the courage required to bridge two completely different worlds. Paulina moved with practiced efficiency, gathering emergency supplies while Ted struggled to shift from the intimacy of their kiss back to survival mode. The distant sound of gas detection alarms grew louder, more urgent. "Stay close," she instructed, shouldering a backpack of emergency equipment. "The route to Delta 4 runs through some narrow passages. If I tell you to hold your breath, do it immediately." They left their safe haven and plunged back into the labyrinth of maintenance tunnels. This time, their journey felt different, not just because of the toxic gas threat, but because everything between them had changed. The hand that guided him now had caressed his face minutes before. The voice directing their escape had whispered his name with desire. "Through here," Paulina directed, leading him into a passage so narrow they had to move single file. Ted found himself acutely aware of her body ahead of him, the way she moved with fluid confidence even in the confined space. The gas alarms were getting closer. Paulina checked her portable gas detector, frowning at the readings. "We need to move faster," she said, but just as the words left her mouth, Ted stumbled. The blood loss and stress were finally catching up with him. His vision blurred as he reached out to steady himself against the tunnel wall. "Ted," Paulina was beside him instantly, supporting his weight with surprising strength. "Hey, stay with me, just dizzy," he managed, but his knees were buckling. Without hesitation, Paulina wrapped his arm around her shoulders, taking most of his weight. "We're almost there, just a little farther." As they struggled through the passage together, Ted marveled at her determination. She was literally carrying him to safety, never once suggesting they stop or rest. Her strength wasn't just physical. It was the kind of deep resilience that came from facing life's challenges without a safety net. "There," she pointed ahead, to a wider tunnel with cleaner air circulation. "Delta 4 access is just around that corner." But as they reached the wider space, Ted's legs gave out completely. He collapsed against the tunnel wall, his face pale and breathing labored. "I need a minute," he gasped. Paulina knelt beside him, checking his pulse and examining his head wound. The bandage she'd applied earlier was soaked with fresh blood. "You're going into shock," she said, her voice professionally calm, but her eyes worried. "Leave me," Ted said weakly. "Get yourself out." "That's not happening." Her tone brooked no argument. She pulled off her transit authority jacket and wrapped it around his shoulders. "Besides, you still owe me that conversation." Despite his condition, Ted managed a weak smile. "About what happens when we get out of here. Among other things." She checked her watch. "Extraction team should be at Delta 4 in 10 minutes. Think you can make it that far?" Ted tried to stand but swayed dangerously. Paulina caught him, and suddenly they were pressed together again, her body supporting his, her face inches from his. "You know," she said softly, "when I woke up this morning, saving a billionaire CEO's life wasn't on my schedule." "And when I woke up this morning," Ted replied, his voice growing stronger with her proximity, "falling for a subway conductor wasn't on mine." The words hummed between them, honest and raw. Paulina's eyes widened slightly. "Falling for?" Before Ted could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnel. "Emergency response," a voice called. "Is anyone in this sector?" "Here," Paulina shouted back. 2 survivors, 1 injured. 3 emergency responders appeared around the corner, loaded down with rescue equipment. The lead EMT immediately assessed Ted's condition, while the others checked for gas contamination levels. "We need to get him to a medical facility," the EMT announced. "Blood pressure's dropping, possible concussion, definitely needs fluids and monitoring." As they prepared Ted for transport, he caught Paulina's hand. "Don't disappear on me," he said urgently. "I won't," she promised. But he could see uncertainty in her eyes. The rescue team worked efficiently, getting Ted onto a stretcher and preparing for the journey to the surface. But as they began moving toward the exit, another emergency responder approached Paulina. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us for debriefing. There are questions about the initial collapse, safety protocol assessment, possible liability issues." Ted tried to protest, but the EMT was already administering IV fluids and monitoring his vital signs. He watched helplessly as Paulina was led away by transit authority supervisors, their eyes meeting one last time before she disappeared around a corner. 2 days later, Ted sat in his hospital room, physically recovered but emotionally restless. He'd been released that morning with a clean bill of health, aside from the stitches in his head. His assistant had brought him fresh clothes, his phone, and a stack of business matters requiring his attention, but all he could think about was Paulina. He tried calling the transit authority, but they'd cited privacy policies and ongoing investigation protocols. He'd sent flowers to the main office, but had no way of knowing if she'd received them. His world of connections and influence seemed useless when it came to finding one subway conductor that saved his life and captured his heart. "Sir?" His assistant, Margaret, peeked into the room. "Your car is ready whenever you'd like to go home." Home. His penthouse suddenly felt less appealing than it had 3 days ago. "Margaret, I need you to find someone for me." "Of course, sir. Corporate contact?" "No, personal." Ted described Paulina, explaining about the rescue without mentioning the kiss or the feelings involved. "I want to thank her properly." Margaret made notes efficiently. "I'll have our security team locate her within the hour." But Ted shook his head. "No security team. This is delicate. I'll find her myself." After Margaret left, Ted dressed slowly, his mind replaying every moment of their time together. The way she'd taken command during the crisis, her stories about growing up in foster care, working her way up from nothing, the vulnerability in her eyes when she talked about her abandoned engineering dreams, the kiss that had changed everything. He needed to see her again, to find out if what had happened between them was real or just the product of extreme circumstances. But more than that, he needed her to know that she'd awakened something in him that he'd thought was dead, the ability to see beyond surfaces to what really mattered. Ted made his way to the Transit Authority building, a gleaming structure in downtown that housed the administrative offices. After several attempts to navigate bureaucracy, he finally convinced a supervisor to tell him when Paulina's shift ended. "She'll be coming off the Red Line route around 6, the supervisor said reluctantly. "Platform 7. At 5:45, Ted stood on Platform 7, feeling more nervous than he had before any business negotiation. Commuters flowed around him, none paying attention to the billionaire in casual clothes waiting for a subway conductor. At exactly 6 o'clock, he saw her. Paulina emerged from the conductor's compartment of an arriving train, her uniform crisp, her hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail. She looked tired but competent, handling the end-of-shift protocols with the same efficiency he'd witnessed during their crisis. When she spotted him waiting on the platform, she stopped mid-stride, surprise flickering across her features. Ted, his name on her lips, sent the same jolt through him it had in the tunnels. "Hello, Paulina." He approached her carefully, aware of the other transit workers nearby. "How are you?" "I'm fine, good." She seemed genuinely flustered, a contrast to the composed woman who'd navigated their underground emergency. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to thank you properly, for saving my life." She glanced around at her colleagues, some of whom were watching their interaction with curiosity. "You didn't need to come all the way down here. The flowers were enough." "You got them?" "Yes, they were very nice. Thank you." The formality in her voice stung. This wasn't the woman who'd kissed him in the emergency shelter, who'd shared her dreams and vulnerabilities. This was someone putting distance between them, and Ted could guess why. "Can I buy you dinner?" he asked. To properly thank you, Paulina hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ted glimpsed the struggle between what she wanted and what she thought was wise. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said finally. "Why not?" She looked around again at the platform, the other workers, the world that was hers in a way his never could be. "Because we're from different worlds, Ted. What happened down there, it was intense, emotional, but it wasn't real life. It felt real to me, did it?" She studied his face. Or was it just adrenaline and gratitude? The question hit harder than it should have, because Ted could see she genuinely believed what she was saying. In her world, people like him didn't develop real feelings for people like her. They might feel grateful, might even feel attracted, but they didn't cross those social lines for anything lasting. "Have dinner with me," he said again, more quietly. "Just dinner. Give me a chance to prove it was more than adrenaline." For a moment, he thought she might say yes. Something flickered in her eyes. Hope maybe, or longing. But then one of her colleagues called out to her. "Paulina, you coming to Murphy's with us?" She turned toward the voice, then back to Ted. "I should go." "Please," Ted said, not caring that he was practically begging. "One dinner. If you still think it was just crisis bonding afterward, I'll leave you alone." Paulina was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as commuters flowed around them. Finally, she nodded. "One dinner, but somewhere normal, not some place with $500 stakes." Relief flooded through Ted. "Wherever you want. O'Malley's on 5th. It's a pub. 7 o'clock. I'll be there." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Ted, don't expect too much from this. We're very different people." But as she walked away with her colleagues, Ted couldn't help but smile. She'd said yes, and more importantly, she'd called it a dinner, not just a thank you meal. At O'Malley's, a neighborhood pub with worn wooden tables and local beer on tap, Ted arrived 15 minutes early. He'd never been in a place like this, not because he was snobby, but because his world simply didn't include neighborhood bars where working people unwound after their shifts. When Paulina arrived at exactly 7, she'd changed out of her uniform into jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes. Her hair was down for the first time since he'd met her, falling in gentle waves around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, and Ted's breath caught as she approached his table. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "You're exactly on time. Transit authority habit. If you're not early, you're late." They ordered, Ted following her lead with the local beer and fish and chips, and spent the first few minutes navigating the awkwardness of seeing each other in normal circumstances rather than crisis mode. "This is strange," Paulina said finally, echoing his thoughts. "Good strange or bad strange?" She considered the question. "I'm not sure yet." As the evening progressed, Ted found himself fascinated by this glimpse into her normal world. She knew the bartender, nodded to regulars, belonged here in a way that was completely foreign to his experience of restaurants where maitre d's knew his name because of his net worth. "Tell me about your work," he said. "What's it really like, day to day?" Paulina relaxed as she talked about the technical aspects of subway operations, the daily challenges of keeping millions of people moving safely through the underground system. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, her passion for the work evident even when she described difficult passengers or equipment failures. "You really do love it," Ted observed. "I do. Maybe it's not what I dreamed of when I was young, but it's honest work that matters. Every day, I help thousands of people get where they need to go safely." "That's more meaningful than most of what I do," Ted admitted. "Don't sell yourself short. Your automation systems will make the entire network safer and more efficient." The way she said it, with genuine respect for his work, surprised him. He was used to people being impressed by his wealth, not his actual contributions. As they talked, Ted became increasingly aware of small details about her. How she gestured with her hands when explaining complex technical concepts, how her laugh was rich and genuine, how she listened with complete attention when he spoke. There was an authenticity to her that his world completely lacked. "Can I ask you something?" Ted said during a lull in conversation. "Shoot. What did you think of me when you first saw me in that tunnel?" Paulina smiled. "Honestly? I thought you were going to get us both killed by panicking. And now?" Now. She met his eyes across the table. I think you're more complicated than I expected. Complicated how? You could have sent flowers and a check and called it even. But you came to find me yourself. You're sitting in a pub you've probably never been in before, asking about my work like it actually matters to you. It does matter to me. You matter to me. The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Paulina's expression softened. Ted, I know what you're thinking, he said. Different worlds, different lives. But that doesn't change what I felt down there. And it doesn't change what I'm feeling now. She was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table to touch his hand. The contact sent electricity through both of them, just as it had in the tunnels. I felt it too, she admitted quietly. But feeling something and acting on it are different things. Why? Because in a week or a month, you'll remember that you're Theodore Medina and I'm a subway conductor. You'll get tired of having to explain me to your friends, your family, your business associates. The pain in her voice told Ted she'd had her heart broken before by someone who'd ultimately chosen social acceptability over love. You don't know me very well if you think I care what other people think, he said. Don't I? She challenged gently. When was the last time you dated someone who wasn't from your world? Someone without a college degree or family money or the right social connections? Ted opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right, and they both knew it. That doesn't mean. It means everything, Paulina interrupted. I've seen how this story ends, Ted. The working-class girl falls for the rich guy, thinks maybe love can bridge any gap, but eventually, reality sets in. His world doesn't accept her, and he has to choose between love and belonging. And he always chooses belonging? In my experience, yes. Ted felt something fierce rise in his chest. Then you've been with the wrong men. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression immediately changed. What is it? Ted asked. It's my supervisor. There's been an incident on the red line. Major equipment failure, possible injuries. She was already standing, grabbing her jacket. I have to go. Now. It's your day off. I'm one of the most senior conductors. When there's a crisis, they call me in. She hesitated at the table. This is what I mean, Ted. My life isn't predictable. I get called away at all hours for emergencies. I work underground in dangerous conditions. I don't attend charity galas or business dinners. But instead of being frustrated by the interruption, Ted felt a surge of admiration. This was who she was. Someone who dropped everything to help when people needed her. Someone whose expertise was essential in a crisis. Can I drive you? He offered. You don't have to. I want to. Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. You really mean that? I really do. As they left O'Malley's together, Ted realized this wasn't the end of their dinner. It was a glimpse into what being with Paulina would really mean. Late-night emergency calls, dangerous situations, a life that revolved around service rather than profit. And for the first time in years, he wanted to be part of something that mattered more than his bottom line. But as they drove toward the subway station where the emergency was unfolding, neither of them could have predicted that this crisis would force Ted to choose between the safety of his comfortable world and the uncertain but authentic love that Paulina offered. The emergency lights were already flashing when they arrived at the station, but what they found there would test everything they thought they knew about trust, commitment, and the courage required to love across the lines that society draws between people. Because waiting in the crowd of emergency responders was the one person Ted had hoped never to see again. And the secret this person carried would either destroy his growing relationship with Paulina, or prove once and for all that some connections are strong enough to survive any storm. The person Ted had hoped never to see again was his ex-fiancée, Victoria Sterling, immaculately dressed in a tailored coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She stood among the emergency responders like a swan among pigeons, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled despite the chaos around them. But it wasn't Victoria herself that made Ted's blood run cold. It was the man standing beside her, taking notes and photographing the scene. Dominic Webb, investigative journalist for the city's most ruthless gossip publication, known for destroying reputations with surgical precision. "Oh God," Ted breathed, understanding immediately why they were here together. "What?" Paulina followed his gaze to the elegant woman who looked completely out of place at an emergency scene. "Who is that?" Before Ted could answer, Victoria spotted them. Her perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her calculating blue eyes. She approached with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Theodore," she purred, air-kissing him, while her eyes assessed Paulina with cold interest. "How wonderful to see you looking so recovered from your little underground adventure." "Victoria." Ted's voice was carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "Research," she replied smoothly. "Dominic is writing a fascinating piece about subway safety protocols. Imagine our surprise when we learned that the city's most eligible bachelor was personally involved in Tuesday's incident." Paulina stiffened beside him, her professional instincts clearly triggered by the mention of safety protocols and journalism. "Are you at the city inspector's office?" Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking. "Oh, how delightful. No, darling, I'm Theodore's former fiancée, Victoria Sterling. Perhaps you've seen me in the society pages." The implication was clear. Paulina wouldn't move in circles where she'd encounter society pages. Ted felt anger rise in his chest at Victoria's casual cruelty. "Paulina is the conductor who saved my life," Ted said firmly. "Without her expertise, I wouldn't be standing here." "How heroic," Victoria said, her tone suggesting heroism was slightly distasteful. "Dominic, you should get a quote from her. The human interest angle could be quite compelling." Dominic stepped forward, recorder in hand, and Ted realized this was a setup. Victoria hadn't come here by coincidence. She'd orchestrated this encounter. "Excuse me," Paulina said, pulling out her radio as emergency chatter crackled through. "I need to report for duty." She walked away, toward the emergency command center, leaving Ted alone with Victoria and Dominic. But her departure felt like abandonment, and Ted could see in her posture that Victoria's presence had shaken her confidence. "She's lovely," Victoria said once Paulina was out of earshot. "Very authentic. I can see the appeal. There's something so refreshing about someone who works with her hands, isn't there?" "What do you want, Victoria?" "Want? I want you to be happy, Theodore. Though I have to wonder if you've thought this through completely." Dominic cleared his throat. "Mr. Medina, could I get a comment about your relationship with the transit worker? Our readers would be fascinated by this modern fairy tale." "There's no story here," Ted said sharply. "Isn't there?" Victoria tilted her head. "Billionaire CEO saved by working-class heroine. Whirlwind romance blooming in the aftermath. It's quite romantic. Though one does wonder about the long-term sustainability of such diverse partnerships." Ted understood the threat now. Victoria wasn't just here to cause trouble. She was here to publicly humiliate him and Paulina, to reduce their connection to tabloid fodder. If you publish anything about what? A public rescue that's already been reported? Your right to date whomever you choose? Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "Though I suppose the question is whether Miss Berger is prepared for the scrutiny that comes with being linked to someone of your prominence." Ted looked toward the emergency command center, where Paulina was coordinating with other responders, her competence evident even in the chaotic scene. She belonged here, commanded respect here. But Victoria was right about one thing. Paulina wasn't prepared for the brutal dissection that came with dating in his social stratosphere. "Leave her alone, Victoria." "I'm not doing anything to her, Theodore. I'm simply ensuring that everyone involved has all the information necessary to make informed decisions." With that cryptic statement, Victoria glided away with Dominic in tow, leaving Ted standing alone with a growing sense of dread. The emergency turned out to be a minor electrical failure that was resolved within 2 hours, but Paulina remained tense throughout the response. Ted waited at the edge of the scene, watching her work with a mixture of admiration and anxiety about Victoria's implied threats. When Paulina finally finished her duties, she approached him with visible reluctance. "Your ex-fiancé seems interesting," she said carefully. "Victoria is a lot of things. Interesting isn't one of them. She's very beautiful. She's very dangerous." Took Paulina's hand, noting how she almost pulled away. "Don't let her get in your head." "She didn't have to get in my head, Ted. She just had to exist. Paulina's voice was quietly resigned. That's your world. Designer clothes, society connections. People who see someone like me as a curiosity at best, a threat at worst. That's not my world. That's my past. Is it? Because she seemed to know you pretty well. And that reporter with her? He was taking notes the entire time we were talking. Ted's heart sank. He'd hoped Paulina hadn't noticed Dominic's documentation of their interaction. Let me take you home, he said. We can talk about this properly. Paulina hesitated. And Ted could see her weighing the smart choice against what her heart wanted. Okay, she said finally, but not to your penthouse. That's not neutral ground. My place isn't neutral? Nothing about your life is neutral, Ted. That's the problem. They drove to Paulina's apartment in Queens, a modest building in a working-class neighborhood, where Ted's luxury sedan looked as out of place as Victoria had at the emergency scene. But as they climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, Ted felt more comfortable than he had in his own space in weeks. It's not much, Paulina said, unlocking her door. But Ted was charmed by her home. It was small but warm, filled with books about engineering and transportation systems, photographs of friends and colleagues, plants thriving on windowsills. It was a space that reflected who she actually was, not who she was trying to appear to be. I love it, Ted said, and meant it. Paulina looked surprised by his sincerity. Really? Really, it feels like you. She moved around the kitchen, making coffee with the same efficient grace she brought to everything else. Ted watched her, noting how she relaxed in her own space, how the tension from Victoria's appearance began to ease from her shoulders. Tell me about her, Paulina said, handing him a mug. Victoria? Your ex-fiancée, what happened between you? Ted settled onto her couch, a comfortable piece that had clearly been chosen for function rather than style. We were engaged for 8 months. It was expected, I suppose. Our families moved in the same circles, we attended the same charity events, looked good together in photographs. What went wrong? I realized I didn't love her, didn't even particularly like her. Ted met Paulina's eyes. She saw our relationship as a business merger, not a marriage. When I broke things off, she didn't take it well. And now she's back with a reporter? Victoria doesn't do anything without a reason. If she showed up tonight, it's because she have a plan. Paulina curled up in the armchair across from him, tucking her legs beneath her. What kind of plan? To make sure you understand exactly what dating me would cost you. And what would it cost me? Ted wished he could lie, could tell her it would be easy. Your privacy. Your normal life. Photographers following you to work. Reporters asking your colleagues about your past. Society columnists dissecting everything from your education to your wardrobe choices. Paulina was quiet for a long moment. That's what I was afraid of. But here's what Victoria doesn't understand, Ted continued, leaning forward. What she's never understood. I don't want someone who fits into my world perfectly. I want someone who makes me want to be better than my world expects. Ted, you saved my life, Paulina. Not just in that tunnel, but in every way that matters. You made me remember that work should serve people, that competence matters more than connections, that authenticity is worth more than approval. He moved from the couch to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I know this won't be easy. I know there will be challenges, people who don't understand, obstacles we can't predict. But I also know that what I feel for you is real in a way nothing in my life has ever been real. Paulina's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What if I'm not strong enough? What if their scrutiny breaks us? Then we'll face it together, and as it breaks us, at least we'll know we tried for something worth having. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she leaned forward and kissed him. This kiss was different from their first in the emergency shelter. That had been born of crisis and adrenaline. This was a choice, made in calm consideration of all the obstacles ahead of them. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Stay, Paulina whispered against his lips. Are you sure? I'm sure that I want to find out what this could be between us. I'm sure that hiding from what I feel won't make it go away. She stood, taking his hand. And I'm sure that if we're going to face scrutiny anyway, I want to have something real to protect. Ted followed her to her bedroom, struck by how different this felt from any relationship he'd had before. There was no pretense here, no performance for an imaginary audience. Just two people who'd found something unexpected and precious in the midst of crisis. Paulina's bedroom was as authentic as the rest of her home. Simple furniture, soft lighting from bedside lamps, photographs of sunsets and city skylines she'd taken herself. She turned to face him, suddenly shy despite her invitation. "I'm not," she began, then stopped. I don't usually." "Neither do I," Ted said softly. "This isn't usual for me either." He reached up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, the simple gesture sending warmth through both of them. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for." "That's just it," Paulina said, stepping closer to him. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." What followed was a slow, tender exploration of the connection that had been building between them since that first moment in the tunnels. Ted marveled at the softness of her skin, the way she responded to his touch with honest desire rather than calculated seduction. Paulina discovered that beneath his expensive clothes and confident exterior was a man capable of reverence, of treating her body like something precious and sacred. They moved together with increasing passion, every touch and kiss deepening their emotional connection. When Ted whispered her name like a prayer, when Paulina's walls finally crumbled completely in his protective embrace, they both understood that this was more than physical desire. This was the foundation of something that could last a lifetime. Afterward, they lay entwined in her bed, skin touching skin, hearts beating in synchrony. Ted traced patterns on her shoulder while Paulina's head rested on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm that had become her favorite sound. "No regrets?" Ted asked softly. "Only that we waited this long," Paulina replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. They talked in whispers about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, dreams for the future, the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. As dawn approached, Ted felt more content than he had in years. "I could get used to this," he murmured, tightening his arms around her. "What, great sex?" Paulina teased. Us, waking up with someone who sees me for who I really am." Paulina lifted her head to look at him. "And who are you really, Theodore Medina?" "I'm a man who's finally found something worth fighting for." She was about to respond when her phone rang. Ted groaned, thinking it was another emergency call, but Paulina's expression as she looked at the caller ID made his blood run cold. "It's my supervisor," she said, anxiety creeping into her voice. "He never calls this early unless." She answered the phone, and Ted watched her face transform from sleepy contentment to shock to something approaching devastation. "I understand," she said finally. "Yes, I'll be there within the hour." She hung up and turned to Ted, her expression stricken. "What is it?" he asked. Oh, he was already dreading the answer. "There's going to be an internal investigation," Paulina said, her voice hollow, "into my conduct during your rescue. Someone has filed a complaint suggesting I violated safety protocols, that I put a civilian at unnecessary risk by taking alternative routes instead of waiting for emergency teams." Ted sat up, fully alert now. "That's insane. You saved my life." "Someone's also suggested that my judgment was compromised by," she swallowed hard, "by personal interest in the civilian I was rescuing. ... The implications hit Ted like a physical blow. Victoria. This was Victoria's plan, not to attack him directly, but to destroy Paulina's career and reputation. "We'll fight this," Ted said immediately. "I'll testify, bring in experts, whatever it takes." But Paulina was already shaking her head. "Don't you see? That would just make it worse. If you defend me, it proves their point about personal involvement affecting my judgment." "So what are you saying?" Paulina looked at him with eyes full of pain and something that looked like goodbye. "I'm saying maybe Victoria was right. Maybe some gaps are too wide to bridge." As the morning light streamed through her bedroom windows, illuminating the wreckage of their perfect night, Ted realized that their real fight wasn't just beginning. It was already threatening to tear apart everything they'd built before they'd even had a chance to truly build it. and the devastating choice Paulina was about to make would test whether their love was strong enough to survive not just society's disapproval, but the systematic destruction of everything she'd worked her entire life to achieve. Ted watched helplessly as Paulina pulled away from him, both physically and emotionally. She slipped out of bed and began gathering her clothes, her movements sharp and efficient. The same professional demeanor she'd used during their tunnel escape. But now, it felt like armor against him. "Paulina, wait, we can figure this out." "Can we?" She pulled on her work clothes, transforming back into the transit authority conductor before his eyes. "My career is everything to me, Ted. It's not just a job. It's 23 years of proving myself, of earning respect in a field that didn't want me. I know that, but running away won't solve anything." She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of pain and resolve. "I have to go in early, meet with the investigators, figure out how to save what's left of my reputation." Ted got dressed quickly, his mind racing. "Let me come with you. I can explain exactly what happened, how you followed proper emergency protocols. Don't you understand? You being there would make everything worse. It would prove their point about compromised judgment." But Ted was already formulating a plan. "Then I won't go as your whatever I am to you. I'll go as the victim you rescued, giving testimony about your professional conduct." Paulina paused in the doorway, and for a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. Then reality crashed back in. "And what happens when they ask about our relationship? About last night? Do we lie under oath?" The question hung between them, highlighting the impossible position Victoria had engineered. Tell the truth, and it supported the claims about compromised judgment. Lie, and they'd be committing perjury. "We'll figure it out," Ted said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. 3 hours later, Ted sat in his corporate attorney's office, pacing while Daniel Woods reviewed the preliminary investigation documents that Ted's security team had obtained through carefully cultivated contacts. "This is sophisticated," Daniel said, adjusting his glasses as he read. "Whoever orchestrated this knew exactly which buttons to push to trigger an internal review. It was my ex-fiancée, Victoria Sterling." Daniel nodded knowingly. "I remember the broken engagement. She didn't take it well. But I didn't realize she was still carrying a grudge." "What are the charges exactly?" "Officially, violation of emergency protocols by taking unauthorized routes during civilian evacuation, failure to wait for proper emergency response coordination, putting a civilian at unnecessary risk through reckless decision-making." Ted felt anger building in his chest. "That's insane. She saved my life by taking those routes. I believe you. But here's the problem. The complaint specifically mentions that her judgment may have been impaired by personal interest in the civilian she was rescuing." "They can't prove that." "Can't they?" Daniel pulled out his tablet, showing Ted a series of photographs. These were taken by Dominic Webb yesterday evening. Ted's heart sank as he saw images of himself and Paulina at O'Malley's, sitting close together, her hand on his, their body language clearly intimate rather than merely professional. "How did he followed you from the emergency scene? Got shots of you having dinner, driving her home, staying overnight." Daniel's expression was grim. "Ted, these photos create a timeline that suggests your relationship began immediately after the rescue. From an investigative standpoint, it looks like her feelings for you influenced her emergency response decisions." Ted slumped into a chair, understanding the trap Victoria had constructed. "What are Paulina's options?" "Fight the charges and risk having her entire career scrutinized. Every decision she's ever made second-guessed. Or what? Accept a suspension pending investigation. Possibly take early retirement with reduced benefits. That's her life's work we're talking about." "I know, but Ted, there's something else you need to understand. If this goes to a formal hearing, they'll subpoena both of you. Under oath, you'll have to answer questions about when your relationship began, whether it affected her decision-making, whether there was quid pro quo involved." "What do you mean quid pro quo?" Daniel's expression was uncomfortable. "They'll ask if she expected anything in return for saving your life. Financial compensation, career advancement, romantic attention. They'll paint her as either incompetent or opportunistic." Ted felt sick. Victoria hadn't just attacked their relationship, She'd engineered a scenario where any attempt to defend it would destroy Paulina's reputation and career. There has to be something we can do. There is, Daniel said carefully. But you're not going to like it. Meanwhile, at the Transit Authority building, Paulina sat across from Captain Samuel Anderson and two investigators she'd never met before. The small conference room felt suffocating as they presented their evidence. "These are serious allegations, Conductor Berger," Captain Anderson said, his tone carefully neutral. "Can you walk us through your decision-making process during the emergency evacuation?" Paulina forced herself to remain professional, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I assessed the situation and determined that standard evacuation routes were compromised by ongoing structural collapse. The alternative routes I chose were all approved emergency pathways." "But you didn't wait for emergency response coordination?" "Time was critical. The civilian was injured and the collapse was ongoing. Waiting could have resulted in fatality." One of the investigators, a thin woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "How would you characterize your relationship with Mr. Medina prior to the incident?" "We had no prior relationship. I had never met him before the tunnel collapse." "And after the incident?" Paulina hesitated, knowing this was the crucial moment. "Mr. Medina expressed gratitude for the rescue." "Is that all?" The question hung in the air. Paulina understood that her next words would determine everything: her career, her reputation, her future. "He asked me to dinner to properly thank me for saving his life." "And you accepted?" "Yes." The thin woman made notes. "Were you romantically involved with Mr. Medina at the time you made emergency response decisions?" "Now. Are you romantically involved with him now?" Paulina felt trapped. Answer: yes. And it suggested her rescue decisions were influenced by immediate attraction. Answer: no, and she'd be lying about something that felt more real than anything in her life. "That's a personal matter," she said finally. "I'm afraid it's not, given the circumstances," Captain Anderson said. "Conductor Berger, we have photographs of you and Mr. Medina having what appears to be an intimate dinner the same evening as the emergency response. We have evidence that he spent the night at your apartment." Heat flooded Paulina's face. The violation of privacy was almost as devastating as the professional implications. "My personal life has no bearing on my professional conduct, doesn't it?" The thin woman slid a photo across the table. Ted kneeling beside Paulina's chair, at O'Malley's, holding her hands, their faces close together. This suggests a level of intimacy that developed very quickly after a traumatic shared experience. People form connections during crisis situations. That doesn't mean. It doesn't mean your judgment was compromised, that your concern for his welfare influenced your risk assessment. Paulina realized she was losing ground with every answer. The investigators had already decided she was guilty. They were just gathering evidence to support their predetermined conclusion. "I followed proper emergency protocols and saved a man's life," she said firmly. "That's what I was trained to do, and that's what I did." Captain Anderson's expression was sympathetic but resigned. "Conductor Berger, given the seriousness of these allegations and the media attention this case is likely to generate, I'm recommending you accept a temporary suspension pending full investigation." "Media attention?" The thin woman slid another document across the table, a draft newspaper article with the headline, "Love in the Tunnels. Did Romance Compromise Subway Safety?" Paulina's heart sank as she read the first few paragraphs, which painted her as either a reckless romantic who put lives at risk or a calculating opportunist who used a rescue situation to catch a billionaire's attention. "This is character assassination," she whispered. "This is damage control," Captain Anderson corrected. "If you accept the suspension, we can potentially minimize the media coverage. Fight it, and this becomes a public spectacle that could destroy your career permanently." Paulina understood the choice they were offering: professional suicide now, or professional execution later. "I need time to think." "You have until 5 o'clock today," the thin woman said. "After that, this moves to the next level, and your options become much more limited." Ted found Paulina sitting on a bench in Central Park, still in her work uniform, staring at nothing. The defeat in her posture broke his heart. "How did it go?" he asked, though her expression already told him everything. "They want me to accept suspension pending investigation," she said without looking at him. Basically admit guilt to minimize the scandal. Ted sat beside her, careful not to touch her, in case photographers were lurking nearby. What are you going to do? I don't know. Her voice was hollow. 23 years of building a career, and it could all be gone because I saved your life. This isn't your fault, Paulina. This is Victoria's revenge against me. But I'm the one paying the price. She finally looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you know what they asked me in there? Whether I expected something in return for rescuing you? Whether I used the situation to my advantage? Rage burned in Ted's chest. They had no right. They had every right. I'm a public employee. My conduct is subject to scrutiny. She stood abruptly. Maybe they're right. Maybe I did let my feelings affect my judgment. That's not true, isn't it? I felt something for you down in those tunnels, Ted. From the moment I saw you, there was something. What if that something made me take risks I wouldn't normally take? Ted stood too, desperate to touch her, to comfort her, but knowing any physical contact could be photographed and used against her. You saved my life with skill and expertise. Everything else came after. Did it? Or am I just telling myself that because the truth is too damaging to face? The truth is that you're the most competent person I've ever met in a crisis situation. The truth is that your knowledge and quick thinking saved both our lives. The truth is that what happened between us afterward doesn't change any of that. Paulina was quiet for a long moment, then shook her head. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters what they can make people believe. So what are you saying? She turned to face him fully. And Ted saw his answer in her eyes before she spoke. I'm saying that maybe we need to step back. Give them nothing more to use against me. You're breaking up with me? I'm trying to save what's left of my career. Ted felt something breaking inside his chest. And if I said I'd give up everything to fight this with you, my company, my reputation, everything, I'd say that's exactly the kind of grand gesture that proves their point about compromised judgment. Paulina replied, but her voice was gentle now, full of the same heartbreak he was feeling. So this is it? Victoria wins? Victoria already won the moment she decided to destroy me instead of you. Paulina's smile was bitter. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. She knew that attacking you directly wouldn't work. You have too much power, too many resources. But attacking me, a working-class woman with no connections? That's much easier. Ted wanted to argue, to fight, to promise her that together they could overcome anything. But he could see in her eyes that she'd already made her choice. I love you, he said quietly. The words hung between them like a bridge she was about to burn. I love you too, she whispered. That's why I have to do this. She started to walk away, then turned back one last time. Ted? When this is all over, when the investigation is finished and the media has moved on to the next scandal, if we're both still free, maybe we can try again. How long will that take? I don't know, months, maybe years. Ted watched her walk away, understanding that he was losing the best thing that had ever happened to him to Victoria's calculated cruelty. But as Paulina disappeared into the crowd of New Yorkers going about their daily lives, Ted felt something hardening inside him. Maybe Paulina was right, that fighting this publicly would only make things worse for her. But that didn't mean he was powerless. Victoria had made this personal, had attacked the woman he loved through calculated destruction of her livelihood. Ted pulled out his phone and called Daniel Woods. Daniel, I need you to investigate Victoria Sterling. Everything. Financial records, business dealings, personal relationships. I want to know every secret she's ever kept. Ted, that's exactly what she did to us. The difference is, I actually have the resources to do it properly. What are you planning? Ted watched Paulina's figure disappear around a corner, carrying his heart with her. I'm planning to remind Victoria Sterling that there are consequences for destroying innocent people. And I'm going to make sure those consequences are severe enough that she never hurts anyone again. But as Ted began plotting his counterattack against Victoria, he had no idea that she was already 3 steps ahead of him, and her next move would force him to choose between protecting Paulina and protecting everything else he'd ever cared about. Because the secret Victoria had been saving for her final strike wasn't just about him. It was about his father's company, his family's legacy, and a 20-year-old cover-up that could send him to prison and destroy everything his father had built. Ted spent the next week marshaling his resources like a general preparing for war. Daniel Woods worked around the clock with a team of private investigators, forensic accountants, and corporate intelligence specialists. What they discovered about Victoria Sterling painted a picture of calculated manipulation that had been building over several years, not decades as Ted initially suspected. "She's been planning this," Daniel reported during an emergency meeting in Ted's penthouse office. "The investigation into your tunnel rescue wasn't opportunistic, it was orchestrated. She's been building relationships with transit authority board members for months, making strategic donations to their preferred charities, positioning herself as a concerned citizen interested in public safety." Ted studied the evidence spread across his conference table. Financial records, email trails, meeting schedules, all painting Victoria as someone who had made destroying his happiness her full-time occupation. What about the reporter, Dominic Webb? "She's been feeding him information for weeks, not just about you, but about several high-profile figures. He's essentially become her personal attack dog, and she's his primary source for society scandal stories." "Can we prove she orchestrated the complaint against Paulina?" Daniel hesitated. "We can prove she had lunch with Captain Anderson 2 days before the complaint was filed. We can prove she made a substantial donation to a transit worker safety fund he oversees. But proving direct coordination would require testimony from someone willing to admit they participated in a conspiracy." Ted felt frustration building. Even with all his resources, Victoria had been careful enough to maintain plausible deniability. "There's something else," Daniel continued, his expression growing more serious. "While investigating Victoria's recent activities, we uncovered something unexpected. She's been researching your father's company history, specifically a project from 1998. The Boston Harbor Tunnel expansion?" "That's the one. Ted, she's found something. I don't know what yet, but she's hired a forensic accounting firm to examine the project's financial records. And she's been meeting with someone who worked on the environmental impact assessments." A cold dread settled in Ted's stomach. The Boston Harbor project had been his father's biggest contract, the foundation of the family fortune. It had also been controversial, with environmental groups questioning whether proper safety protocols had been followed. "My father followed every regulation to the letter," Ted said. But uncertainty crept into his voice. "I believe that. But Victoria clearly thinks she's found something that could damage not just you, but your father's legacy and the entire company." Ted's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the Four Seasons bar at 8 p.m. Come alone." Daniel saw Ted's expression change as he read the message. "What is it?" "Victoria wants to meet." That's either very good news or very bad news. With Victoria, it's usually both. The Four Seasons bar was exactly the kind of place Victoria would choose for a confrontation. Elegant, discreet, filled with the kind of people who minded their own business unless there was profit in not doing so. Ted arrived exactly on time to find Victoria already seated at a corner table, looking immaculate in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Theodore," she greeted him with a smile that was all predator. "You look tired. The stress of recent events, I imagine." Ted took the seat across from her, noting that she'd chosen a table positioned so that anyone entering the bar would see them together. Even this meeting was calculated for maximum impact. "What do you want, Victoria?" "Straight to business. I always admired that about you." She sipped her martini delicately. "I want you to stop investigating me." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. Daniel Woods's people have been very thorough, though not quite as discreet as they think." "Did you really believe I wouldn't notice private investigators asking questions about my charitable donations and social calendar?" Ted kept his expression neutral. if you have nothing to hide? Everyone has something to hide, Theodore. Even your sainted father. The words hit like a physical blow. Ted felt his carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, and Victoria's smile widened as she noticed. Ah, so Daniel found my little research project. Good, that saves us some time. My father was an honest man who built his company through hard work and integrity. Your father was a man who made some very difficult choices when he was young and ambitious. Choices that, viewed through today's lens, might seem less than sterling. Victoria pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. Ted saw copies of documents he'd never seen before. Environmental assessments, safety reports, financial records from the Boston Harbor project. What am I looking at? Evidence that your father's company cut corners on environmental safety measures to meet an aggressive deadline and stay within budget. Specifically, they used substandard materials for toxic waste containment and falsified inspection reports, and those materials failed. Ted's blood ran cold as he read the documents. They showed discrepancies between reported and actual materials used, inspection dates that didn't match project timelines, and most damaging of all, email exchanges between his father and project managers about managing environmental concerns. These could be forgeries. They could be, but they're not. Victoria's voice was silk over steel. I have testimony from 3 workers who were on that project, all willing to swear that they were ordered to use inferior materials and to keep quiet about safety violations. What do you want? I want you to back away from Miss Berger, completely. No more investigating me, no more attempting to salvage her career, no more romantic gestures. You disappear from her life as if you never met. And if I don't? Victoria's smile was razor sharp. Then tomorrow morning, Dominic Webb publishes a story about how Medina Transportation Systems was built on environmental fraud and cover-ups, how your father's legacy is a lie, and how you've been benefiting from money earned through activities that poisoned Boston Harbor for decades. Ted felt the walls closing in around him. You're talking about destroying innocent people's lives. I'm talking about consequences, Theodore. Your father made choices. Those choices had results. I'm simply ensuring that those results finally come to light. My father's dead. This won't hurt him. No, but it will hurt you. It will hurt your employees, your investors, your clients. It will hurt every family that depends on Medina Transportation for their livelihood. Victoria leaned forward. And it will hurt Miss Berger too, because when this story breaks, she'll be painted as the woman who seduced you, just as your empire was crumbling. The trap was perfect, and Ted could see every angle of it. Fight for Paulina, and Victoria would destroy his father's reputation, his company, and hundreds of jobs. But abandon Paulina, and Victoria would have won completely. How do I know you'll keep your word? How do I know that even if I stay away from Paulina, you won't publish this story anyway? Because destroying you was never the goal, Theodore. Separating you from that woman was the goal. Give me what I want, and I have no reason to pursue this further. Why? Ted asked, genuine bewilderment in his voice. Why does my relationship with Paulina matter so much to you? For the first time since he'd known her, Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. Something raw and painful flickered across her features. Because you chose her over your own world, she said quietly. You chose authenticity over appropriateness, substance over style. You chose everything I could never be, over everything I worked my entire life to become. Ted saw the truth then. This wasn't just about revenge or social control. This was about Victoria's own deep insecurity, her fear that she had built her entire identity on things that didn't actually matter. Victoria, don't. Her composure snapped back into place like armor. I don't want your pity or your analysis. I want your answer. Ted looked at the documents spread on the table, evidence that could destroy everything his father had built. He thought about Paulina, probably at home, wondering if her career would survive the investigation. He thought about his employees, innocent people who depended on him for their livelihoods. If I agree to this, you call off the investigation into Paulina's conduct? I'll do better than that. I'll ensure she's quietly vindicated and possibly even promoted. A reward for her heroic service during the tunnel collapse. It was a devil's bargain, But Ted could see no alternative. Refuse, and Victoria would destroy multiple innocent lives out of spite. Accept, and at least Paulina's career would be safe, even if their relationship was over. I need guarantees. Written agreements about what happens to this information. Of course, I'm not unreasonable. Victoria finished her martini and stood. You have 24 hours to decide, Theodore. Choose wisely. She started to leave, then turned back with one final twist of the knife. Oh, and Theodore? Miss Berger doesn't need to know about this choice you're making. As far as she knows, you simply realized that she was right about your worlds being too different. Much kinder that way, don't you think? As Victoria walked away, Ted sat alone at the table, staring at the evidence that could destroy everything he'd inherited from his father. The documents might be real, or they might be elaborate forgeries. The witnesses might be telling the truth, or they might be paid actors. But it didn't matter, because Victoria had ensured that the truth was less important than perception. In the court of public opinion, even the suggestion of environmental fraud would be enough to destroy his company and everyone who depended on it. Ted's phone buzzed with a text from Paulina. Investigation meeting went better today. They might drop the charges. Thank you for staying away. I think it's helping. The irony was bitter. Paulina thought his absence was helping her case, not knowing that Victoria was orchestrating her vindication as part of a larger manipulation. Ted typed and deleted a dozen responses, finally settling on, I'm glad to hear it. You deserve to be vindicated. What he didn't send was, I love you, and I'm about to sacrifice our future to protect you and everyone else I care about. As Ted left the Four Seasons, he had no idea that Paulina had spent the afternoon investigating something that could change everything, and that her discovery about the tunnel collapse would reveal a truth that neither Victoria's blackmail nor Ted's sacrifice could overcome. Because sometimes the most devastating secrets aren't the ones people work to hide, but the ones that hide in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to look for the truth. Have you ever felt caught between where you came from and where love was taking you? Share your story and hit that subscribe button if you're rooting for Ted and Paulina to find their way through this impossible situation. But as Ted drove through the city streets, wrestling with the most difficult decision of his life, he had no idea that in less than 12 hours, everything he thought he knew about the tunnel collapse, about Victoria's motivations, and about his father's past would be turned completely upside down by a discovery that would either destroy them all or finally set them free. Paulina hadn't slept in 36 hours. While Ted was discovering the depth of Victoria's blackmail scheme, she had been conducting her own investigation into the tunnel collapse, not to save her career, but because something about the official reports hadn't felt right. She sat in her small apartment, surrounded by technical manuals, structural engineering reports, and photographs she'd taken during their escape. Her kitchen table looked like a detective's evidence board, covered with documents that told a story the investigators seemed determined to ignore. The official cause of the collapse was listed as gas explosion from construction site creating structural failure. But Paulina's 23 years of tunnel experience told her something different. The pattern of damage, the specific sections that had failed, the way the debris had fallen, none of it matched what a gas explosion should have caused. Her phone rang, startling her from her analysis. The caller ID showed her friend Marvin Rivera, a structural engineer who worked for the city's transportation department. Marvin, please tell me you have something. I have something, but you're not going to like it, Marvin said, his voice tense. Paulina, are you sure you want to pursue this? Because what I found could get both of us in serious trouble. Tell me. The collapse wasn't caused by a gas explosion. The gas explosion happened after the initial structural failure, probably when damaged pipes were ignited by sparking electrical systems. Paulina felt her heart rate increase. What caused the initial failure? Systematic sabotage. Someone deliberately weakened key support structures in that section of tunnel. Professional job too. Whoever did this knew exactly which supports would create a cascading collapse. The words hit Paulina like a physical blow. You're saying someone tried to murder Ted? I'm saying someone tried to cause a major tunnel collapse, Whether they knew your billionaire would be down there at that exact time. Marvin paused. Actually, that's the really disturbing part. The sabotage was timed perfectly. If the collapse had happened an hour earlier or later, it would have killed dozens of commuters during rush hour. But it happened during Ted's inspection, which was scheduled and publicly announced. Someone wanted to kill him specifically, and they didn't care if they took out half the subway system to do it. Paulina sank into her chair, her mind reeling. Someone had tried to commit mass murder to assassinate Ted Medina, and she was being investigated for saving his life from that assassination attempt. Marvin, I need you to document everything. Photographs, analysis, all of it. Paulina, if I'm right about this, we're talking about someone with access to construction schedules, tunnel blueprints, and industrial explosives. This isn't some random criminal. This is someone with serious resources and connections. All the more reason to expose them. And all the more reason they might try to silence us if they find out what we know. After Marvin hung up, Paulina stared at her evidence board with new understanding. The investigation into her conduct wasn't just professional retaliation. It was a cover-up designed to discredit the one person who might have noticed the sabotage. She thought about Ted's ex-fiancée and her reporter friend. Their convenient appearance at the emergency scene. Their detailed knowledge of the investigation. Their perfect timing in documenting her relationship with Ted. What if Victoria Sterling wasn't just a jealous ex seeking revenge? What if she was covering up attempted murder? Paulina's hands shook as she reached for her phone to call Ted, but then she stopped. If Victoria was capable of orchestrating mass murder, what would she do to prevent exposure? And what would she do to Ted if she discovered he was getting too close to the truth? Instead, Paulina called Captain Anderson. Captain, I need to meet with you immediately. I have evidence about the tunnel collapse that changes everything. Conductor Berger, you're on suspension pending investigation. You shouldn't be. Someone tried to assassinate Ted Medina, and they were willing to kill dozens of innocent people to do it. The investigation into my conduct is being used to discredit the only witness who might have noticed the sabotage. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Where are you? Captain Anderson asked, finally. At home, but Captain, I think we're all in danger now that I know the truth. Meanwhile, Ted sat in his office, staring at Victoria's ultimatum. 24 hours had shrunk to 18, and he was no closer to finding a solution that didn't involve sacrificing either Paulina or hundreds of innocent jobs. Daniel Woods knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Ted, we have a problem. A big one. Bigger than Victoria's blackmail? Much bigger. Daniel's face was pale. I've been investigating the Boston Harbor project documents Victoria showed you. They're real, but they're not the whole story. What do you mean? Your father didn't cover up environmental violations. He discovered them. The substandard materials, the falsified inspections, the safety violations, they were all done by the subcontractor without your father's knowledge. When he found out, he reported it to federal authorities and testified against the company responsible. Ted felt a mixture of relief and confusion. So the documents proved his innocence, not his guilt? They prove his innocence if you have all of them, but Victoria only has the ones that make him look guilty. She's missing the federal investigation reports, the testimony transcripts, the evidence at his cooperation with authorities. How is that possible? Because someone sealed those records 20 years ago. Someone with enough influence to bury a federal investigation and make the hero look like the villain. Ted's blood ran cold. Victoria's family? Her father was a federal judge. Her uncle was the EPA administrator who oversaw the investigation. Her family had the power to seal records and control the narrative. So this has been planned for decades? It gets worse. The subcontracting company that actually committed the violations? It was owned by Sterling Construction, Victoria's family business. Your father's testimony bankrupted them and sent several family members to prison. The full scope of Victoria's revenge became clear. This wasn't about their broken engagement or jealousy over Paulina. This was about destroying the man whose integrity had destroyed her family's criminal enterprise 20 years ago. Daniel, we need to unseal those federal records. I'm working on it, but it could take weeks or months. Victoria's threatening to publish tomorrow. Ted's secure phone line rang, the one only his closest associates knew. He answered it expecting Daniel's assistant or his security chief. Instead, he heard Paulina's voice, tight with fear and urgency. Ted, don't talk long. I think my phone might be monitored. Someone tried to kill you in that tunnel. The collapse was sabotage, designed to look like an accident. What? I had the structural damage analyzed. Professional sabotage, timed to your inspection schedule. Ted. I think Victoria Sterling is behind it. Ted's mind raced, connecting dots he should have seen earlier. Paulina, where are you? Meeting with Captain Anderson. I'm turning over all my evidence. But Ted, if I'm right about this, then Victoria isn't just trying to break us up. She's trying to finish what she started in that tunnel. The line went dead. Ted stared at the phone, understanding with crystal clarity that Victoria's ultimatum wasn't about choosing between Paulina and his company. It was about choosing between exposing her as an attempted murderer and staying alive long enough to do it. Daniel, Ted said, his voice deadly calm. Cancel all my meetings, activate Security Protocol 7, and get me everything you can find about Sterling Construction's involvement in tunnel construction projects over the past 5 years. Ted, what's going on? Victoria Sterling didn't just try to destroy my father's reputation. She tried to finish the job by killing me. And now that Paulina's figured it out, she's going to try to silence both of us. Daniel's face went white. Should I call the police? Call them, but also call our private security team. If Victoria was willing to commit mass murder once, she won't hesitate to do it again to cover her tracks. Ted looked out his office window at the city skyline, thinking about Paulina somewhere out there, carrying evidence that could expose Victoria's crimes. She was brave and competent, but she was also alone, unprotected, facing a woman who had already proven she would kill to protect her secrets. But as Ted mobilized his resources to protect the woman he loved, he had no idea that Victoria's most devastating move was already in motion. Because the meeting Paulina was walking into wasn't with Captain Anderson at all. It was with someone Victoria had been cultivating for months, someone who had been feeding her information about the investigation from the very beginning. And the trap that was closing around both Ted and Paulina had been designed not just to separate them, but to ensure that neither of them would live to tell the truth about what had really happened in those tunnels, or why Victoria Sterling was willing to destroy anyone who threatened to expose the dark secret that had driven her family's decades-long quest for revenge. Paulina arrived at the Transit Authority building 30 minutes early, her evidence carefully organized in a briefcase that could expose decades of corruption and attempted murder. The building was eerily quiet for a Tuesday afternoon, but she attributed that to the late hour. Most administrative staff would have gone home by now. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where Captain Anderson had asked to meet in Conference Room C. As the elevator doors opened, she felt a prickle of unease. The hallway was completely empty, no security guards at their usual posts, no cleaning staff preparing for the evening shift. Paulina checked her phone, no missed calls or texts. Maybe she was just being paranoid after the stress of the past few days. Conference Room C was at the end of a long corridor lined with administrative offices. As she approached, she could see light spilling from under the door, but she couldn't hear any voices inside. Paulina knocked twice and waited. "Come in," called a voice that definitely wasn't Captain Anderson's. Paulina hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Every instinct told her to turn around and leave, but she needed to get this evidence to someone in authority who could act on it. She pushed open the door. Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the conference table, elegant and composed in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Paulina earned in 6 months. Beside her sat a man Paulina didn't recognize, tall, thin, with the kind of forgettable face that made him perfect for surveillance work. "Miss Berger," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." "Where's Captain Anderson?" "Called away on an emergency. I'm afraid it's just us." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. "Though I believe you have something that belongs to me." Paulina clutched her briefcase tighter. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. Evidence about the tunnel collapse. Analysis that proves it wasn't an accident. Very thorough work, I'm told. The casual way Victoria discussed classified information sent ice to Paulina's veins. How do you know about your investigation? Miss Berger, I've been monitoring everything about you since the moment you pulled Theodore from that tunnel. Your phone calls, your meetings, your amateur forensic analysis. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you started asking the right questions? Paulina backed toward the door, but the thin man was already moving to block her exit. Her heart hammered as she realized the trap she'd walked into. What do you want? I want you to understand something very important, Victoria said, standing with fluid grace. 20 years ago, your Theodore's father destroyed my family. He testified against Sterling Construction, sent my uncles to prison, bankrupted our company. My family lost everything because Manuel Medina decided to play hero. Because your family were criminals who cut corners and endangered lives. Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. Because my family were businessmen who understood that sometimes difficult choices have to be made to succeed. Manuel Medina was naive enough to believe that integrity mattered more than survival. So you decided to murder his son? I decided to balance the scales. The Medina family destroyed mine through sanctimonious righteousness. It seemed poetic that Theodore should die the same way my family died, buried under the weight of their own moral superiority. Paulina realized she was listening to the confession of someone who had orchestrated mass murder as personal revenge. The casual way Victoria discussed attempted assassination made her seem more dangerous than any criminal Paulina had ever encountered. The tunnel collapse was supposed to look like an accident, Victoria continued. Theodore dies during a routine inspection. Tragic, but explainable. No one investigates too closely. No one asks uncomfortable questions. But I saved him. But you saved him. And then, even worse, you made him fall in love with you. Do you have any idea how infuriating it was to watch him choose authenticity over everything I represented? Victoria began pacing around the table, her movements predatory. I spent months orchestrating his death, only to watch him emerge from those tunnels, more alive than he'd ever been. In love with a subway conductor who embodied everything I could never be. So you tried to destroy my career instead. I tried to separate you from him. When that didn't work, I tried blackmail, but now. Victoria's smile was cold as winter. Now you've become too dangerous to leave alive. The thin man stepped forward, and Paulina saw something metallic glint in his hand. Not a gun, something smaller, more discreet. A syringe. Heart attack brought on by stress, Victoria explained conversationally. Very believable for someone who's been under investigation, facing career destruction. They'll find you collapsed in this conference room, another tragic casualty of modern workplace pressure. Paulina looked around desperately for an escape route, but the thin man was between her and the only door. The windows were sealed. No way out except through Victoria. Ted will know you killed me. Theodore will be devastated by your tragic death. Guilt-ridden, actually, since he'll believe his abandonment of you contributed to your fatal stress levels. He might even blame himself enough to take his own life. The casual cruelty of it, planning not just Paulina's murder, but Ted's psychological destruction, revealed the true depth of Victoria's evil. He won't believe it was natural causes. He won't have a choice. The evidence of my involvement died with you. Victoria nodded to the thin man. Do it. But as the man moved toward Paulina, she did something he wasn't expecting. Instead of backing away or trying to fight, she lunged forward toward the conference table where her briefcase sat. Her fingers found the emergency recording device she'd activated when she first walked into the room. A precaution she'd learned during her years dealing with difficult passengers and workplace disputes. Too late, Paulina said, holding up the small device. Everything you just said has been transmitted to 3 different locations, including the FBI field office and Ted's personal attorney. Victoria's face went white with rage. That's impossible. Transit Authority Emergency Protocol. When conductors are investigating potential safety violations, all conversations are automatically recorded and transmitted to multiple oversight agencies. It was a lie. No such protocol existed. But Victoria's moment of uncertainty was all Paulina needed. She grabbed her briefcase and dove toward the door, shouting as loudly as she could for help. The thin man tried to grab her, but Paulina had spent 23 years working in dangerous environments. She twisted away from his grasp and made it to the hallway, screaming for security as she ran toward the elevator. Behind her, she could hear Victoria's voice, no longer composed, shouting orders to the thin man. Footsteps pounded after her as she reached the elevator bank and frantically pressed the call button. The elevator doors opened just as the thin man rounded the corner. Paulina threw herself inside and hit the emergency button, causing the elevator to drop immediately to the lobby level. As soon as the doors opened, she ran toward the security desk, shouting for help. But the lobby was empty. No guards, no evening staff, no one who could help her. Victoria had planned this perfectly, ensuring the building would be empty when she sprang her trap. Paulina's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Ted, but before she could answer, the elevator doors opened behind her, and Victoria stepped out, no longer hiding her murderous intent. "You can't run forever, Miss Berger," Victoria called across the empty lobby. "And now that you've heard too much, there's really no choice about what happens next." Meanwhile, across the city, Ted was coordinating with law enforcement and his security team when Daniel Woods burst into his office with urgent news. "Ted, we have a problem. Paulina never made it to her meeting with Captain Anderson." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Captain Anderson is at his daughter's soccer game. He never scheduled a meeting with Paulina, and he doesn't know anything about her investigation." Ted felt ice flood his veins. Then who did she go to meet? "That's what I'm trying to figure out. But Ted, there's more. The Transit Authority building's security system went offline an hour ago. All cameras, all monitoring, complete blackout." "Victoria. Has to be. She lured Paulina there under false pretenses, and now she's isolated and unprotected." Ted was already moving toward the door. "Get the security team to that building now. Call the police, FBI, everyone." "Ted, wait. If you go there yourself." "If I don't go there myself, who will? Paulina dies." Ted's voice was deadly calm. "Victoria's not trying to separate us anymore. She's trying to eliminate the evidence. And Paulina is the evidence." As Ted's car raced through the evening traffic toward the Transit Authority building, he tried calling Paulina's phone over and over. Each unanswered ring increased his terror that he was already too late. But in the empty lobby of the transit building, Paulina was making a desperate calculation. Victoria was between her and the main exit, but there was a service entrance that led to the subway platform level, a route Victoria wouldn't know about unless she'd studied the building plans as thoroughly as she'd studied everything else. "You know what I find most amusing about this situation?" Victoria said, approaching slowly across the marble floor. "Theodore thinks he's in love with you, but he doesn't really know you at all. He's in love with the idea of authenticity, the fantasy of finding someone real in his artificial world. And you think you know the real me? I know you're about to die in a tragic accident, and he's about to spend the rest of his shortened life blaming himself for your death." Victoria's casual reference to Ted's shortened life made Paulina realize this wasn't ending with her murder. Victoria planned to kill them both, probably making it look like a murder-suicide driven by the stress of their star-crossed romance. But as Victoria closed the distance between them, neither woman realized that Ted's security team was already surrounding the building, that FBI agents were coordinating with local police, and that the recording device Paulina had been bluffing about was actually real. She had activated her phone's emergency recording function, and everything Victoria had confessed was being transmitted live to Ted's phone. The final confrontation between the three of them was about to begin, and the truth that emerged from that confrontation would either destroy them all or finally free them from Victoria's decades-long campaign of revenge. But first, Paulina had to survive the next 60 seconds, because the thin man had produced a gun, and Victoria was no longer interested in making her death look accidental. The thin man raised his gun just as the building's main doors exploded inward. Ted burst through with his security team, followed immediately by FBI agents and local police. The lobby filled with shouting voices, and the red dots of laser sights converging on Victoria and her assassin. "Drop your weapon," Agent Jennifer Brandon commanded, her service pistol trained on the thin man. But Victoria remained eerily calm, even with a dozen weapons pointed at her. "How disappointing, Theodore. I was hoping we could resolve this privately. It's over, Victoria, Ted said. His eyes locked on Paulina across the lobby. She was alive, unharmed, and the relief that flooded through him was so intense he could barely stand. Is it? Victoria smiled, that cold, perfect smile. Agent Brandon, I assume you're here because of some wild story about attempted murder and conspiracy. I'm afraid Miss Berger has been under tremendous stress lately. The investigation into her professional conduct, the pressure of her inappropriate relationship with Mr. Medina, it's clearly affected her judgment. We have recordings of your confession, Agent Brandon replied. Everything you said about the tunnel sabotage, about murdering Manuel Medina's son, about your family's criminal enterprise. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. Recordings can be fabricated, and even if they were genuine, they'd be inadmissible, obtained without warrants or proper legal procedures. Ted stepped forward, his phone in his hand. Actually, they're completely admissible. Paulina called me during your confession. Everything was recorded through an active phone call, which makes it legal evidence. The blood drained from Victoria's face as she realized her mistake. In her arrogance, she'd confessed to decades of crimes while Paulina's phone was transmitting everything to Ted. You're lying. Ted held up his phone, pressing play. Victoria's voice filled the lobby. 20 years ago, your Theodore's father destroyed my family. He testified against Sterling Construction, sent my uncles to prison, bankrupted our company. As her own words convicted her, Victoria's perfect mask finally slipped completely. The rage and hatred she'd hidden behind elegant composure erupted in a scream of pure fury. He destroyed everything. My family, our legacy, our future, all for his precious integrity. She turned on Paulina with venomous hatred. And you gave him something I could never be, something real, something authentic. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch someone choose substance over everything you've worked to become? I know what it's like to earn respect through competence instead of inheritance, Paulina replied steadily. I know what it's like to build something worth having instead of destroying other people's lives. Victoria lunged toward Paulina, but Agent Brandon and 2 other agents restrained her before she could reach her target. Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and multiple federal crimes related to the Sterling Construction case, Agent Brandon announced, snapping handcuffs onto Victoria's wrists. As they led Victoria away, she turned back toward Ted with one final venomous parting shot. This isn't over. Even from prison, I can destroy you. The media attention, the scandal, the questions about your father's business. Actually, Ted interrupted. It is over. Daniel? Daniel Woods stepped forward with a folder full of documents. We've unsealed the federal records from the Sterling Construction case. Every piece of evidence proving Manuel Medina's heroic cooperation with authorities. Every document showing how he sacrificed his own business relationships to expose your family's crimes. The story that's breaking tomorrow isn't about environmental cover-ups, Ted continued. It's about how Manuel Medina risked everything to protect public safety, and how his son nearly died 20 years later because the criminals he exposed wanted revenge. Victoria's face went white as she realized that her ultimate weapon, the threat to Ted's father's reputation, had become the very thing that would vindicate the Medina family and expose her own evil. As the police led Victoria away, the thin man, who turned out to be a hired assassin with connections to several unsolved murders, was also arrested. The lobby gradually emptied until only Ted and Paulina remained, standing apart from each other, as if unsure how to bridge the distance that Victoria's manipulation had created between them. Are you hurt? Ted asked, his voice carefully controlled. No, scared, but not hurt. Paulina clutched her briefcase of evidence. Ted, I'm sorry I doubted you. When you pulled away after the dinner, you thought I was exactly who Victoria said I was. Someone who would choose social acceptance over love. Ted moved closer to her. You weren't wrong to think that. Most people in my position would have made that choice. But you didn't. No. I was about to sacrifice our relationship to protect you from Victoria's blackmail. But not because I was ashamed of you. Because I couldn't bear the thought of her destroying your career to hurt me. Paulina felt tears burning her eyes. We both tried to protect each other by pushing each other away. Maybe that's what love actually is, Ted said softly. Not just wanting to be with someone, but being willing to sacrifice your own happiness for their well-being. They stood facing each other in the empty lobby, both understanding that they had survived something that would have destroyed most relationships. Not just external attacks, but their own fears and insecurities about whether love could truly bridge the gaps between different worlds. "So what happens now?" Paulina asked. Ted closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Now we decide if we're brave enough to try again, knowing it won't always be easy, knowing there will always be people who don't understand, knowing that we'll have to fight for what we have. And if I said yes? If you said yes, I'd ask you to marry me." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and completely unexpected. "Ted, I know it's crazy. I know we've barely begun to figure out how to be together. But I also know that I don't want to spend another day of my life without you in it." Paulina searched his face, seeing not the billionaire CEO or the eligible bachelor, but the man who had trusted her completely in that dark tunnel, who had opened his heart to her despite every social convention, who had been willing to sacrifice everything to protect her. "Yes," she whispered. Ted pulled her into his arms, and their kiss was everything their first kiss in the emergency shelter had promised. Passion and commitment, and the promise of a future built on something real. 6 months later, Ted and Paulina stood in the renovated Grand Central subway station, which had been transformed into the most unique wedding venue in New York City history. The ceremony took place on the platform where they had first emerged from the tunnels, symbolizing how love could transform the most unlikely places into something beautiful. Paulina wore a elegant but simple gown that allowed her to move freely, her hair styled in soft waves that caught the light from the restored chandeliers. Ted wore a custom suit, but one chosen for comfort rather than display of wealth. The guest list was as unique as the venue. Transit workers sat beside Fortune 500 CEOs, Paulina's foster family mixed with Ted's business associates, and everyone seemed genuinely happy to celebrate a love story that had captured the city's imagination. Captain Anderson, fully vindicated after the investigation revealed Victoria's manipulation of the internal review process, officiated the ceremony in his dress uniform. "We are gathered here," he began, "to celebrate the marriage of two people who proved that the strongest foundations are built not on what we own, but on who we choose to become for each other." As they exchanged vows, Ted spoke about how Paulina had saved not just his life, but his understanding of what mattered. Paulina talked about how Ted had shown her that love was worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. Their first dance was to a string quartet playing on the subway platform, surrounded by the gentle rumble of trains that had become the soundtrack of their love story. Daniel Woods, serving as best man, had prepared a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Most love stories begin with a meet-cute at a coffee shop or a chance encounter at a party. Ted and Paulina's love story began with a tunnel collapse and attempted murder. But somehow, that seems perfectly appropriate for two people who do everything the hard way. As the evening progressed, Ted and Paulina found quiet moments to marvel at how their lives had transformed. The scandal that Victoria had tried to create had instead become a story of heroism and authentic love that the public had embraced completely. Medina Transportation Systems was more successful than ever, with Paulina serving as chief safety officer and revolutionizing industry standards through her practical knowledge and engineering expertise. The company had become known not just for innovative technology, but for ethical business practices that put human safety above profit margins. Paulina's career had been more than vindicated. She'd been promoted and had become a spokesperson for working-class expertise in technical fields. She was finishing her engineering degree through night school, not because she needed the credential anymore, but because she wanted to complete the dream she'd deferred decades ago. But perhaps most importantly, they had learned to navigate the challenges of their different backgrounds with grace and humor. Ted had discovered that authenticity was more fulfilling than approval, while Paulina had learned that some gaps could be bridged when both people were willing to meet in the middle. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Ted and Paulina found themselves alone on the subway platform where their journey had begun. "Any regrets?" Ted asked, echoing the question he'd asked her after their first night together. "Only that we waited so long to trust that what we felt was real," Paulina replied, leaning into his embrace. "And what happens tomorrow when we start navigating married life?" "Tomorrow we wake up together and figure it out as we go," Paulina said, her voice full of confidence and joy. "After everything we've survived, I think we can handle whatever comes next." As they walked toward the exit, hand in hand, the last train of the evening rumbled through the station. But instead of the threatening sound it had been during their crisis, it was now the comforting rhythm of a city that never slept, carrying millions of people safely to their destinations. Their love story had begun in darkness and uncertainty, but it had emerged into light and permanence. They had learned that the strongest connections weren't built on social compatibility or shared backgrounds, but on mutual respect, genuine care, and the courage to choose love even when it required fighting for it. And as they stepped out into the New York night, beginning their married life together, both Ted and Paulina knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. What would you do if love required you to choose between family approval and following your heart? Have you ever had someone see your true worth when others couldn't? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of underground love and surface transformation touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for tomorrow's passionate tale. Let me know in the comments what drew you most to Ted and Paulina's journey from crisis to forever love. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the darkest places, when two people choose to be each other's light.